Welcome, dear listeners, to a world where shadows whisper and the unknown lurks just beyond the edge of the light. Tonight, I invite you to step into the darkness with me, to listen to stories that will send chills down your spine and make you question what lies beyond the veil of reality. Dim the lights, settle in, and let the eerie whispers of the night take hold. This is the Rainy Night Storyteller, and these are tales of terror. The Grandview Hotel. It wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it wasn't a roach motel either. Somewhere in that comfortable, forgettable middle ground, my job night shift desk clerk usually reflected that. Quiet, predictable, mostly dealing with late check-ins, early departures, the occasional drunk stumbling and looking for a room. I'd seen it all, or so I thought. Most nights, I'd kill time scrolling through Reddit, listening to podcasts, anything to keep the boredom at bay. The quiet could be unnerving. The echoing silence of the empty hallways, the low hum of the ancient HVAC system, the feeling that you were the only living soul in the entire building. It got to you after a while, especially on nights like tonight. There was a heaviness in the air, a stillness that felt wrong. Even the usual city noises outside seemed muted, like the world itself was holding its breath. I checked the clock, 2:17 a.m. Only a few more hours until my shift ended. I was looking forward to it more than usual tonight. I decided to do my rounds, check the fire exits, make sure everything was locked up tight. Standard procedure. But as I walked through the dimly lit hallways, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease, like I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but of course, there was nothing there. Just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. Back at the desk, I glanced at the system monitor. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. Room 304. It was showing as occupied. Checked in. My blood ran cold. That was impossible. I hadn't checked anyone in for hours, and definitely not into 304. Just the number itself sent a shiver down my spine. It was different. Nobody booked 304. Not ever. It had been empty since I started working at the Grandview, almost 2 years ago. There was just something about the room, a bad vibe that clung to it like a persistent odor. Even the other staff avoided it. They wouldn't talk about it, but you could see it in their eyes. Fear. I checked the security cameras, just to be sure. Maybe someone had slipped past me, used a back entrance or something. But no, nothing. The cameras showed the lobby, the hallways, the parking lot, all empty, except for me, wandering around like a ghost. I tried to rationalize it. A system glitch, probably. Those things happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I picked up the phone and called up to 304. It rang a few times, then clicked. I held my breath, listening. I heard rustling, like someone moving around inside the room. Whispering, almost. But no one answered. My heart started pounding in my chest. This was way beyond a simple glitch. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. I knew I had to check. Hotel policy and all that. But deep down, I knew there was something else driving me. Curiosity? Morbid fascination? I don't know, but I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed the master key and headed up to the 3rd floor. The elevator creaked and groaned as it ascended, each floor clicking by like a countdown. The hallway lights flickered as I walked, casting long, distorted shadows on the faded wallpaper. The silence was deafening, except for the faint sound of water. I reached 304. The door was locked, as it should be, but the sound of running water was definitely coming from inside. My hand trembled as I inserted the master key. I hesitated for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. Then, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, but just as I crossed the threshold, the light flicked on, as if someone had just flipped the switch. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and the water in the sink was running full blast. But no one was there. The room was empty, spotless, like no one had been there at all, except for the running water. I stood there for a minute, just taking it all in. My heart was racing. I don't know why. It just felt wrong. I turned off the water, my hands still shaking. I checked the bathroom, peering into the shower, behind the curtain. Nothing. I looked under the bed, half expecting to find. What? I didn't even know. I opened the closet. Empty. Just a few hangers rattling in the silence. I walked back into the main room, my eyes scanning every corner. There was nothing out of place. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But the feeling of unease persisted, like a cold hand resting on the back of my neck. Back downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something unexplainable. I decided to do some digging. I checked the booking history for 304. Empty. For the past 6 months. Not a single booking. That was impossible. Someone had been in that room. I had heard them. I had seen the lights turn on. I had seen the water running. I went to find Mrs. Henderson, the longtime employee. She'd been working at the Grandview since, forever. She knew everything about the hotel, its secrets, its history. I told her what had happened, trying to keep my voice calm, professional. She just gave me this look, kind of shifty, kind of scared. "Don't worry about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just remember not to put guests in there." That, of course, made me even more curious. I couldn't let it go. I did some searching online, digging through old newspaper archives, local history websites, and I found it. An old news article about a murder in the Grandview, room 304. Years ago, a guest had been killed in the bathroom, brutally murdered. And after that, well, no one wanted to stay in 304 anymore. The room had been empty ever since. The weird thing is, it didn't stop. After that night, the strange occurrences continued. Every now and then, the system would show 304 as checked in. The lights would come on. The water would run, like someone was still there. Even though the room was always empty, the Grandview never closed 304. It's still there, waiting, and I'm still working the night shift. Sometimes, I hear the water running, and sometimes, I see the light flicker on in 304. And I know, deep down, that I'm not alone. The old house was a living, breathing thing. Its floorboards groaned beneath my feet. Its walls whispered secrets in the dead of night. I'd grown up within its embrace, its familiar creaks and sighs a comforting lullaby. But this summer, the lullaby had turned into a chilling nocturne. The sleepwalking started when I was a child, a harmless quirk that my parents would recount with a chuckle. I'd wander the halls, rearrange furniture, even attempt to cook breakfast in my sleep. But lately, it had become something else entirely, a terrifying descent into the unknown. I'd wake up in the most unsettling places, the cobweb-infested attic, the damp and musty basement, even the overgrown graveyard at the edge of our property. Each episode was more bizarre than the last, the lines between dreams and reality blurring with every passing night. It wasn't just the locations, it was the things I did while sleepwalking. I'd find cryptic messages scrawled on the walls in my own handwriting, unsettling drawings of grotesque figures, objects moved to impossible locations. One morning, I woke up to find all the photographs in the house turned face down, a wave of dread washing over me as I realized I couldn't remember doing it. The nights were a torment. I'd lie in bed, paralyzed by fear, listening to the house settle around me. Footsteps in the hallway, a scratching at my window, whispers just beyond the threshold of my hearing. They haunted the darkness, fueling my growing paranoia. I felt a constant sense of being watched, a presence lurking just beyond my perception, its eyes burning into my soul. And then there were the visions, fleeting glimpses of shadows dancing in the periphery, grotesque faces with hollow eyes and twisted smiles appearing in the darkness. They were so vivid, so real, that I began to question my own sanity. Was I losing my grip on reality? Was I going mad? The old house seemed to be closing in on me, its shadows growing longer, its whispers louder. I felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of its secrets. My once familiar home had become a prison, a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. I started to withdraw, isolating myself in my room, the curtains drawn tight against the encroaching darkness. I avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see reflected back at me. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, vivid and terrifying, leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for air. My parents noticed the change in me, the fear in my eyes, the tremor in my voice. They tried to help, offering words of comfort, suggesting therapy, but nothing seemed to ease the growing dread that consumed me. One day, while searching for answers in the local library, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article. It detailed a series of strange occurrences that had plagued the house decades ago. Sleepwalking episodes, unsettling visions, and a mysterious disappearance. The story mirrored my own experiences with chilling accuracy. The article mentioned a darkness, an ancient evil that had been tied to the house for generations. It fed on fear, on vulnerability, preying on those with a predisposition for sleepwalking. It used them as conduits, its puppets in the night, carrying out its sinister bidding. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized the truth. I wasn't going mad. I was being manipulated, controlled by an unseen force. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, a malevolent entity that was slowly consuming me. The sleepwalking episodes intensified, becoming more dangerous, more unpredictable. I'd wake up on the roof, teetering on the edge, the wind whipping at my face. I'd find myself in the middle of the road, headlights bearing down on me, the screech of tires echoing in my ears. The visions became more frequent, more terrifying. I'd see the figure from the newspaper article, a tall, gaunt specter with eyes that burned like embers. It would appear in my dreams, in the shadows of my room, its skeletal fingers reaching out to claim me. One night, I woke up in the basement, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The only light came from a single flickering bulb, casting long, distorted shadows on the rough stone walls. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. And there, in the shadows, I saw it. The figure. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, its face contorted in a grotesque grin. It reached out towards me, its long, skeletal fingers grasping at my arm. I screamed, a sound that echoed through the empty basement. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The figure advanced, its icy grip tightening around my arm, pulling me towards the darkness. I thrashed, I kicked, I clawed at its grasp, but it was no use. I was being dragged towards the abyss, the darkness closing in around me. And then, just as I felt myself slipping away, I woke up. I was lying in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the only sound the gentle rustling of the curtains in the breeze. I lay there for a long time, trying to calm my racing thoughts, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The fear was real, the visions too vivid to dismiss. I had seen the darkness, felt its touch, and I knew that it wouldn't rest until it had claimed me. I left the house the next day, unable to bear the weight of its secrets any longer. I moved to a new town, started a new life, trying to bury the memories of that terrifying summer. But the shadows followed me. They haunted my dreams, whispered in the quiet moments when I was alone. I sought help, therapy, medication, anything to escape the grip of the darkness. But it was no use. The house, the figure, the fear, they were all a part of me now, woven into the fabric of my being. I still sleepwalked, not as often, not as intensely, but the fear remains. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside my window sends a shiver down my spine. I know that the darkness is still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting to claim me once and for all. I live with the knowledge that I may never be truly free. The house, the figure, the fear, they are all a part of me now, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. And in the quiet moments, when the world is asleep, I can still hear the whispers, feel the cold touch of the shadows, and I know that I am not alone. The rain was coming down sideways, mirroring the chaos in my gut. It had been 6 months since Liam walked out, 6 months since I traded in shared dinners for microwave meals and whispered sweet nothings for the deafening silence of my empty apartment. Swiping through profiles on Hinge had become my nightly ritual, a desperate attempt to fill the void. That's how I met Elena. Her profile picture was intriguing, all smoky eyes and a sly smile that hinted at secrets. We chatted for a few days, her messages laced with a playful wit that had me hooked. When she suggested we meet up at this dimly lit speakeasy downtown, I didn't hesitate. I got there early, nerves buzzing like faulty wiring. The place reeked of stale beer and desperation, the perfect backdrop for this whole online dating charade. Elena was late, of course. Just as I was about to chuck the whole thing and head home, she slid into the booth across from me. And that's when things started to get weird. Elena looked nothing like her picture. Years older, harsher lines etched around her eyes, and a brittle, almost manic energy radiating off her. She wore too much perfume, a cloying floral scent that couldn't quite mask the underlying odor of something else. Something I couldn't place, but that set my teeth on edge. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice a husky rasp that didn't match the playful tone of her texts. "Got caught up in stuff." She wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze darting around the room like a trapped bird. We made small talk, or at least I tried to. Every question I asked was met with a vague answer, a nervous laugh, another frantic scan of the room. It was like she was on high alert, waiting for something or someone. "Another drink?" I offered, hoping to ease the tension, though honestly, I was already regretting this whole thing. She nodded eagerly, and I flagged down the bartender. As I waited for the drinks, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual collection of lonely souls seeking solace at the bottom of a glass. When I turned back, Elena was staring at me, a strange intensity in her eyes. "You have kind eyes," she said, her voice low and unnervingly intimate. "Gentle." I shifted uncomfortably. This was getting weirder by the minute. The drinks arrived, and we clinked glasses. Elena took a long gulp of her martini, then set it down with a shaky hand. "I need to use the restroom," she mumbled, then practically bolted from the booth. I watched her go, a knot tightening in my stomach. Something was definitely off. Maybe I'd been too quick to judge Liam for wanting out. Maybe being alone wasn't so bad after all. I checked my phone, half hoping for an excuse to leave. Nothing. Elena had been gone for a while now. I was about to go check on her when I noticed her purse was still in the booth. Strange. Just then, the bartender came over. "Everything all right?" he asked, eyeing me with suspicion. "I think my friend might be sick," I said, gesturing to the empty seat. He shrugged. "Happens all the time. Want me to send someone to check on her?" I hesitated. Did I really want to involve anyone else in this? But then again, what if Elena really was sick? "Sure," I said finally. "Thanks." The bartender nodded and disappeared into the back. I waited, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness. The feeling of unease intensified, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Finally, the bartender returned, his face grim. "There's no one in the restroom," he said, "and the back door's been left open." I felt a surge of panic. Elena was gone, and she'd left her purse behind. I grabbed my coat and rushed out into the rain, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I scanned the street, but there was no sign of her. Where could she have gone? As I stood there, shivering in the downpour, a chilling realization dawned on me. Elena hadn't just disappeared. She'd vanished, and something told me I was in way over my head. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and unanswered questions. I called the police, but they weren't much help. Elena was just another missing person, another statistic in a city that swallowed people whole. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle. I went back to the speakeasy, hoping to find some clue, some trace of her. But the bartender just gave me a wary look and told me to forget about it. Then, one night, as I was tossing and turning, unable to sleep, I remembered something Elena had said. "You have kind eyes," she'd whispered. "Gentle." It hit me like a bolt of lightning. Elena hadn't been interested in me. She'd been interested in someone else, someone with kind, gentle eyes. Liam. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding. I had to warn him. But how? I hadn't spoken to him in months. I finally managed to track down his number and called him, the phone ringing with agonizing slowness. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Liam," I gasped. "You need to listen to me. There's this woman." I told him everything about Elena, the speakeasy, the strange feeling I'd had, the way she'd looked at me. He was silent for a long moment. Then, he said, "I think I know who you're talking about." My blood ran cold. "You do?" "There's been someone watching me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A woman." I thought I was imagining things. "Liam, you need to get out of there," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." He agreed, and we hung up. I stayed up all night, fear gnawing at me. Had I warned him in time? Or was it already too late? The next morning, I called Liam again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but there was no reply. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no word from him. The police were no closer to finding Elena, and the dread that had been gnawing at me grew into a gaping chasm of despair. I never saw Liam again, and I never learned what happened to Elena. But I'll never forget the chilling feeling of being watched, the unnerving intensity in her eyes, the way she'd whispered, "You have kind eyes." Gentle. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear her voice, a ghostly echo in the silence of my empty apartment. And I wonder, what if I hadn't warned Liam? What if I'd been the one with kind, gentle eyes? The biting wind howled like a banshee, clawing at the windows of the Blackwood Hotel as I stepped inside. Snow swirled around me, a blizzard raging outside, but the interior of the hotel was eerily still. Dust motes danced in the shafts of pale light filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating the faded grandeur of the lobby. The air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. I'd always been drawn to the strange and the unknown, a thirst for adventure that had led me to some of the most remote corners of the world. This time, my journey had brought me to the Blackwood, a secluded hotel nestled deep in the heart of the mountains. It was a place shrouded in rumors, whispers of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, their eyes wide with fear and fascination. I, of course, was intrigued. The more they warned me away, the more determined I was to uncover the truth behind the Blackwood's sinister reputation. I'd arrived just as the storm hit, the last guest to seek shelter within its aging walls. The hotel manager, a woman with eyes as cold and sharp as shards of ice, greeted me with a curt nod. She seemed ancient, her skin pale and wrinkled, her movements slow and deliberate. She handed me the key to my room, a heavy brass key with the number 217 etched into its surface, and pointed me towards the staircase. "Second floor, last room on the left," she said, her voice raspy and low. "Don't wander the halls at night. And whatever you do, don't disturb the other guests." I nodded, a shiver running down my spine despite the warmth of the lobby's fireplace. There was something unsettling about the woman, a sense of unease that clung to her like a shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, scrutinized, as if she were assessing my worthiness to be within her domain. The room was small and sparsely furnished, the wallpaper peeling, the furniture worn and creaky. A single window overlooked the desolate landscape, the swirling snow obscuring the view. I unpacked my bag, the silence of the room amplifying the pounding of my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a sense of foreboding that settled over me like a suffocating blanket. As night fell, the storm intensified. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the hotel. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the hotel's dark secrets. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, approaching my room. They stopped just outside my door, and I held my breath, listening intently. A moment later, I heard a soft knock, a gentle tapping that sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer. The manager had warned me not to disturb the other guests, but curiosity gnawed at me. Who would be wandering the halls at this hour, in the midst of a blizzard? I got out of bed and crept towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest, peering into the dimly lit hallway. There was no one there, just the endless stretch of faded carpet and peeling wallpaper, disappearing into the shadows. I closed the door, a wave of relief washing over me. It must have been my imagination, the wind playing tricks on my ears. But as I turned away from the door, I heard it again. A soft whisper, just barely audible, coming from the corner of the room. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words, but they were too faint, too distorted. It was like a voice from another world, a ghostly echo from the past. I crept towards the corner of the room, my senses on high alert. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me closer. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the wall, my fingers tracing the outline of the faded wallpaper. And then, I felt it. A cold spot, a sudden drop in temperature that sent shivers down my spine. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something there, something unseen, something malevolent. I could feel its presence, its eyes burning into my back. I turned around, my gaze sweeping the room, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, dancing and shifting in the dim light. I tried to rationalize it. It must be a draft, a cold spot in the wall. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something else in the room with me, something unseen, something that whispered my name in the darkness. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, the covers pulled tight around me, my eyes wide open, listening to the sounds of the hotel. The wind howled outside, the floorboards creaked, and the whispers continued, faint and insidious, weaving their way into my dreams. The next morning, I awoke with a start, my body drenched in sweat. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that glistened in the morning sun. I got out of bed and went to the window, gazing out at the breathtaking scenery. But the beauty of the landscape couldn't dispel the lingering sense of unease that clung to me like a shroud. I decided to explore the hotel, hoping to find some answers to the mysteries that haunted its halls. I wandered through the empty corridors, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I peered into the dusty rooms, each one seemingly frozen in time, as if waiting for its occupants to return. I found an old library on the third floor, its shelves lined with leather-bound books and faded manuscripts. I spent hours browsing the collection, searching for any clues to the hotel's dark past. And then, I found it. A diary, hidden away in a secret compartment behind one of the bookshelves. The diary belonged to a former guest, a man who had stayed at the Blackwood many years ago. He had written about his experiences in the hotel, his encounters with the strange and the unexplained. He had heard the whispers, seen the shadows, felt the presence of something unseen, and he had warned others to stay away, to avoid the Blackwood at all costs. As I read the diary, a chilling realization dawned on me. The man's experiences mirrored my own. The footsteps, the whispers, the sense of being watched, it was all the same. But his story didn't end well. He had disappeared one night, vanished without a trace, his fate forever shrouded in mystery. I closed the diary, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that I was not alone in my experiences. There was something else in the Blackwood, something ancient and malevolent, something that preyed on the vulnerable and the curious, and I was its next target. As I returned to my room, my heart pounding in my chest, I knew that I had made a grave mistake. I should have heeded the warnings, should have left the Blackwood Hotel while I still could. But curiosity had gotten the better of me, and now I was trapped. I spent the rest of the day in a state of near constant panic, my senses on edge, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of the unseen presence that haunted its corridors. I tried to read, to write, to distract myself with anything, but my mind was consumed by the fear that gnawed at me. Night fell, and with it came the darkness, the silence, and the whispers. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the presence of something in the room, watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep, but it was no use. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving their way into my dreams. I saw the figure from the diary, its eyes glowing with an unholy light, its skeletal fingers reaching out towards me. I screamed, a sound that echoed through the empty room. I tried to sit up, but my body was paralyzed, my limbs heavy as lead. I could feel the figure's cold touch on my arm, its fingers digging into my flesh. I struggled against its grip, but it was no use. I was being pulled towards the darkness, a vortex of pure evil that threatened to consume me. I screamed again, a desperate cry for help, but my voice was drowned out by the howling wind outside. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended. I woke up, my heart pounding, my body drenched in sweat. I lay there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had seen the figure, felt its touch. It was real, and it was coming for me. From that night on, the hauntings intensified. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, my body paralyzed. I would see the figure, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its skeletal fingers reaching out towards me. I would hear the whispers, the faint, insidious whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I tried to escape, but the hotel was a labyrinth, its winding corridors and hidden rooms trapping me like a spider in a web. I tried to reach out to the other guests, but they were all too afraid to help, too wrapped up in their own fear. I was alone, and I was at the mercy of the Blackwood. One night, I decided to make a stand. I grabbed a rusty axe from the tool shed and armed myself with a flashlight. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes scanning the shadows. I reached the door to room 217, the room where the figure had first appeared. I took a deep breath, raised the axe, and swung. The door splintered, the wood exploding into shards. I stepped inside, the flashlight casting a beam of light into the darkness. The room was empty, silent. There was no sign of the figure, no trace of its presence. I let out a sigh of relief. Had it finally gone? Or was it just hiding, waiting for me to let my guard down? I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw it. The figure, standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. It was watching me, waiting. I screamed and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I raced down the hallway, the figure chasing me, its footsteps echoing behind me. I reached the front door, wrenched it open, and stumbled out into the night. The snow was still falling, a thick blanket of white covering the ground. I ran, my feet sinking into the snow, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I collapsed to the ground, my heart pounding in my chest. I lay there for a long time, staring at the snowflakes falling from the sky, wondering if I would ever see the Blackwood again. As I lay there, I heard a voice, a soft, gentle voice that seemed to come from nowhere. "It's over," the voice said. "You're safe now." I opened my eyes, my heart still pounding, but the figure was gone. It was just me, alone in the snow, staring up at the stars. I don't know what happened that night, what saved me from the clutches of the darkness, but I do know that I survived. I left the Blackwood that night, never to return. I carried the scars with me, the scars of a terrifying encounter with the unseen, the scars of a battle that I never fully understood. I've never told anyone about my experiences at the Blackwood. They would think I was crazy, a victim of my own imagination. But I know the truth. I know what I saw, what I felt, and I know that the Blackwood is a place to be avoided, a place where the darkness lurks, waiting for its next. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour gas station hummed a dull tune, a stark contrast to the quiet pre-dawn hours. I'd pulled in around 4 a.m., the tail end of my overnight shift at the urgent care. Western Massachusetts. Rural. Boring. These were the words that echoed in my head as I pumped gas, a necessary evil on my way home to my parents' place. Home. The word felt foreign, forced. It had only been a few months since my life in Boston had imploded. A bad breakup, a hasty lease signing with the wrong person, and suddenly I was back in the childhood bedroom I swore I'd escaped. The pump clicked, signaling a full tank. I sighed, ready to escape the chilly morning air. As I replaced the nozzle, I noticed another car pull up to the adjacent pump, a beat-up blue sedan. A man emerged, and as I turned to head inside to pay, he walked over, a strange look on his face. "Want to see a funny trick?" he asked, his voice grating. I immediately bristled. This was exactly the kind of awkward, unwanted interaction I was trying to avoid in this desolate place. I wanted nothing more than to pay for my gas and disappear. But something, a morbid curiosity, perhaps, made me pause. "What's the trick?" I asked, regretting it instantly. He launched into that ridiculous, childish, pulling my finger off illusion, the kind kids do to annoy each other. He kept glancing at me, a smirk playing on his lips, as if he expected some grand reaction. The sheer absurdity of it, combined with the unsettling hour and his general demeanor, made my skin crawl. I gave a weak, forced laugh, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But he didn't. He just kept doing the stupid trick, even after I turned away, feigning disinterest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I practically ran inside, paid for my gas in cash, a pathetic attempt to save a few pennies, and practically sprinted back to my car. As I pulled away, I glanced back. He was still at the pump, his car sitting there, the gas hose still attached. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Paranoia gnawed at me. I even checked my back seat before locking the doors, a ridiculous precaution, but I couldn't help it. The drive home was short, thankfully. Just 5 minutes. I pulled into the driveway, careful to replace the spare key in its hiding spot, a habit I'd developed since moving back. I slipped inside, locked the door behind me, and headed straight for the kitchen. My 4:30 a.m. dinner awaited, the chicken sandwich and salad I grabbed at the bagel shop after my shift. I ate quietly, trying not to wake my parents. We only had 2 cars, and I was borrowing my mom's. I hadn't needed a car in Boston, but here, in the sprawling suburbs, it was essential. I'd been using the hidden spare key, a system my parents had in place long before I returned. Suddenly, I heard the distinct click of the front door unlocking, followed by the creak of it opening and closing. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, mid-chew, listening intently. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. No response. No footsteps. Just an unnerving quiet. I cautiously peeked into the foyer. Empty. But the door was definitely ajar. My blood ran cold. I flew up the stairs, bursting into my parents' room. They were both asleep, startled awake by my abrupt entrance. I stammered, trying to explain, a wave of panic washing over me. Someone had come into the house. My dad, bless his heart, jumped out of bed, ready to defend his family. He hurried downstairs, turning on every light as he went. My mom and I followed, our hearts pounding. He checked the front door. The spare key was gone. Horror settled upon us. My mom, even in her panic, managed to scold me for not being more careful with the key. My dad began a systematic search of the house, room by room. We trailed behind him, our eyes wide with fear. He checked my older brother's room, leaving the lights on as he moved on. I lingered, a sense of dread clinging to me. I knew, deep down, that no one would be there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I checked under the bed, in the closet, nothing. Downstairs, my dad was in the basement. I was too terrified to go down there, even with him present. My mom stayed with me on the main floor, but curiosity, that insatiable beast, pulled me towards the dining room, adjacent to the foyer. I got down on my hands and knees and peered under the dining room table. And there he was, the man from the gas station, hiding under my parents' dining room table. The sight was so surreal, so utterly terrifying that I couldn't breathe. I screamed, a primal, ear-splitting shriek. My mom echoed my scream, her voice laced with pure terror. My dad, hearing the commotion, came bounding up the stairs, his eyes blazing. The man emerged from under the table, his face twisted into a snarl. He lunged at my dad, who, despite being 20 years his senior, stood his ground. A chaotic struggle ensued. My mom and I, fueled by adrenaline and fear, joined in, hitting and punching the intruder. He was strong, but we were a force of nature, protecting our family. Finally, overwhelmed by our combined assault, He broke free and fled through the front door. We didn't hesitate. We called 911, our voices trembling. The police arrived quickly, thank God. They took our statements, their faces grim. The man still had the spare key. That night, a police car was stationed in our driveway, a deterrent against his return. My dad, ever the pragmatist, wedged a chair against the front door and slept in the living room, a makeshift barricade against the unknown. The next day, the locks were changed. My parents' days of hiding a spare key outside were over. The relief was immense, but the fear lingered. I felt a crushing guilt, the weight of knowing I had brought this danger into my family's home. My carelessness had almost cost us dearly. I replayed the gas station encounter in my mind, searching for clues. Had he followed me? I hadn't noticed any other cars behind me on the drive home, but it was dark. Maybe he'd driven with his headlights off. The thought sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. The incident solidified my resolve. I had to get out of there. Back to the city, back to my own space, back to a life where I didn't feel like a terrified child again. This rural retreat had turned into a nightmare, and I knew I couldn't stay a moment longer than I had to. The hum of the tires on the I-95 was a constant drone, a soundtrack to the long, lonely drive ahead. 2 a.m. That was my sweet spot. Leaving Long Island at this ungodly hour meant I'd be well clear of the New York and New Jersey traffic nightmares by the time anyone else dared to venture onto the road. Florida was my destination, a month-long visit with my brother. Driving, not flying, was the chosen mode of transport. I needed my own wheels down there, and wasn't about to rely on my brother for every little errand. Dunkin' Donuts was my first stop, a necessary pilgrimage for the caffeine fix that would fuel the first leg of the journey. A long, grueling drive lay ahead, and I was determined to conquer it. By the time I crossed into New Jersey, it was after 3 a.m. Smooth sailing so far. The I-95 stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading south. Around 4 a.m., hunger pangs began to gnaw at my stomach. I hadn't bothered with breakfast before leaving, figuring I'd grab something on the road. I spotted a sign for Wendy's and decided to pull off. I was in some desolate part of Jersey, no streetlights, just the beam of my headlights cutting through the darkness. It felt like the middle of nowhere. The Wendy's parking lot was partially lit, and I saw one other car parked off to the side. I pulled into the drive-thru, relieved to find the menu board illuminated. But as I sat there, staring at the menu, no voice came through the intercom. I waited, then cleared my throat and said, "Excuse me?" Still nothing. I pulled out my phone and looked up the Wendy's. Closed. Didn't open until 6 a.m. Of course. Just then, 3 sharp knocks on my passenger window made me jump. I turned to see a man standing there, grinning. He motioned for me to roll down the window. Uncomfortable, I cracked it open just enough to hear him. "Place isn't open," he said. "Yeah, I just figured that out," I replied. He then launched into a story about how his car had died. He pointed to the other car in the parking lot, parked way over in the corner by the woods. "Battery's dead," he said. "Need a jump." He practically begged me to help. I hesitated. Something felt off. But then I thought about karma. I didn't want bad karma coming my way for leaving someone stranded. "I don't have jumper cables," I said. "Don't worry," he replied. "I have them in my trunk." I glanced at his car again, parked so far away, almost hidden by the trees. But the thought of karma nagged at me. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll help." He backed away so I could pull my car next to his. We positioned our cars hood to hood, as close as possible. I got out and popped my hood. He went to his car and popped his hood, then grabbed his jumper cables. We connected the cables, and I started my car. We waited a minute, then I told him to try starting his car. He took his time walking back to his car, and when he tried, nothing. We waited a couple more minutes, tried again. Still nothing. Strange, considering he'd supposedly just been driving. He then walked away from his car, pulled out his phone, and started talking in Spanish. I couldn't understand what he was saying. He came back after his call and told me his friend said to wait a few more minutes. That's when I heard it. The roar of engines. 2 pickup trucks, one from each side of the Wendy's, came speeding into the parking lot. They pulled up right behind my car, boxing me in. It clicked. This was a setup. I quickly disconnected the jumper cables, slammed my hood shut, and locked my car doors with the key fob. The man was still smiling at me, but it was a nasty, predatory smile now. His eyes, they were cold. I didn't waste any time. I darted into the woods. I ran as fast as I could, branches whipping at my face, tripping over unseen obstacles in the dark. I could hear men yelling in Spanish behind me, their voices getting closer. I fell to the ground, trying to make myself as small as possible, my heart pounding in my chest. The voices seemed to swirl around me, then slowly faded away. I lay there, catching my breath, until I heard my car alarm blaring in the distance. My stomach dropped. All my stuff was in that car. Clothes, shoes, everything I needed for the month in Florida. I cautiously made my way back to the parking lot, crouching low. The trucks were gone. Just my car remained, its rear window shattered. My heart sank. Everything was gone. My suitcase, my bags, all my belongings. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I called the police, my voice shaking. They came, took my statement, and told me they'd checked the security footage from Wendy's when it opened. They also informed me that the other car had a fake license plate, and the pickup trucks had no plates at all. They said they'd do what they could, but I knew it was a lost cause. I turned around and drove home, the most depressing drive of my life. 2 hours back to Long Island, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the gnawing feeling that I'd been completely and utterly taken advantage of. My stuff was never recovered. Those guys got away with it. I just hoped karma would catch up to them someday. The monotony of the highway had finally gotten to me. 15 hours on the road, and I was only halfway through this seemingly endless journey. The clock on the dashboard glowed, 3:17 a.m., the witching hour, as some would call it. My eyes felt gritty, my legs cramped, and the insistent pressure in my bladder was reaching a critical point. I'd been stubbornly ignoring the rest stop signs for the past hour, determined to make good time, but nature was calling with increasing urgency. Finally, I caved. A small, unassuming rest stop appeared on the horizon, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness. I veered off the highway, grateful for the chance to stretch my legs and relieve myself. The parking lot was deserted except for a lone sedan parked near the edge of the woods. I pulled in, my headlights briefly illuminating the darkened windows of the other car before I switched them off. The rest stop was one of those bare-bones affairs. Just a small brick building housing the restrooms and nothing else. No vending machines, no picnic tables, just the promise of a toilet and a brief respite from the road. I hurried towards the building, eager to answer the call of nature. As I pushed open the restroom door, I was met with an unexpected and unsettling sight. A man stood in the corner, his back to me, his head bowed. At first, I assumed he was using the urinal, but as I stepped further into the room, I realized he wasn't facing the urinal at all. He was simply standing there, facing the corner, motionless. A wave of unease washed over me. Was he all right? Was he sick? Or was this something more sinister? My mind raced, conjuring up all sorts of unsettling scenarios. I hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Should I say something? Ask if he was okay? But something in his posture, in the strange stillness of his form, made me hesitate. I needed to use the restroom, though, and the only stall was past him. I tried to maintain a casual pace, my heart pounding in my chest, as I walked towards the stall. I glanced at him as I passed, but his face was obscured by the shadows. I quickly slipped into the stall, locking the door behind me, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence in the restroom was heavy, oppressive. I tried to focus on my task, but the man's presence loomed large in my mind. I couldn't relax, couldn't bring myself to, After a minute or two of this internal struggle, I gave up. I flushed the toilet, hoping the sound might break the tension, and emerged from the stall. The man had turned. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was facing me. His eyes were fixed on me, a blank, unsettling stare. I couldn't read any emotion in his face, just a chilling emptiness. It was unnerving, to say the least. I mumbled a quick, "Excuse me," and practically fled the restroom. I hurried back to my car, my mind reeling. Who was that guy? What was he doing? Was he following me? As I pulled out of the rest stop, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was walking towards the parking lot exit, his gaze fixed on my car. I sped up, eager to put some distance between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered something truly strange, something unsettling, something that would linger in the back of my mind long after this journey was over. And so, dear listeners, another tale comes to an end, or does it? Perhaps as you turn off the lights tonight, you'll hear a faint whisper, a creaking floorboard, or feel the presence of something watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me again for another chilling story. Until then, sleep well if you can.